My name is Ebbe, and I'm going to talk about positive psychology applied in coaching. And these slides you can find on the internet, and also some of the stuff that I put on your chairs, you can also find that downloaded from the internet. Hopefully, in 1 hour from now, you should feel that you've learned something about what some of the most experienced coaches in positive psychology, what they do when they apply positive psychology in coaching, because I've interviewed 42 people from around the world on how they work, and I'm going to summarize a bit of that in this session. And you should get an opportunity to reflect on what you hear and kind of discuss with the person sitting next to you. Also, there's a little coaching practice exercise at the end, based on the tool that I put on your chairs. And also, at the end of this slideshow, I have some recommendations for where you can go to learn something more. Just to begin with, I'm just going to spend just a few minutes to give you some background information on the research that I'm doing, and then I'm going to spend most of the time telling you about the results and how you can use that practically as a coach. Since my research is on the application, so that's what I'm mostly interested in. Yeah, I've said this. And I don't expect that you know that everybody here is expert coaches, but just to find out how many of you do coaching? Oh wow! Oh, okay. And how many of you integrate positive psychology into that? Okay, almost everybody. Great. And you're welcome to ask questions while I'm presenting, and otherwise I also have some time at the end for questions. Just a little bit about my background. I'm a psychologist from Denmark, and I did the MAP program in Philadelphia a couple of years back. And the MAP stands for Master of Applied Positive Psychology, but actually it was more research-based and not very applied. So I left the MAP program with a big need to start applying this stuff, and it was a little bit difficult to find out what to do with it. And many of the people that I was teaching research on positive psychology, and I was teaching research on coaching, and the people that I was teaching were psychologists, coaches, consultants, and they would always ask me, or say, this is really interesting, but how do we use it? And I could only say, I use it this way, and the people I've talked to, they use it that way. But there isn't really that much research on the application of research, so research on how to use positive psychology in coaching. So most of the research is just on positive interventions, but it's not been researched in a coaching context. So my PhD project that I'm doing right now is on how do people actually use this research when they try to coach somebody else. So I've been around the world interviewing 42 people and asking them questions like, so what happens before you meet the client the first time, what happens in the first session, what happens in between the first and the second session, do you use these interventions, how do you use them, when do you use them, why do you use them, why do you pick that one, how do you know which one to pick, do you use these assessments, how do you create client engagement, what do you do to establish a good relationship, stuff like that. So I'm just pumping them for information for. Basically, it's a PhD project where I get to pump my competitors for information for 1.5 to 2 hours. And I video record all those interviews, and the interviews will be out on YouTube, so everybody can kind of see the raw data. So you don't have to trust my interpretation of it. You can actually see it if there's someone in particular that you think, oh, this is a great coach, or I've heard about him or read some of his stuff, then you can see the interview. So hopefully next week I can have some of the videos out. The research project that I'm currently doing is I created a review of positive psychology in coaching, and to my surprise there was more than I thought that had been written, but most of it was not research-based. It was like book chapters and stuff like that. And I created an annotated bibliography, so if you want to know what has been published, you can look at the annotated bibliography. It's on the internet, and there's a link to it at the end of these slides. Also, I did these interviews, and then now I'm trying to build theory based on those interviews. So I'm trying to kind of find out what can I recommend to other people. So I wanted to begin with, I just wanted to say, well, I asked all these people what they do, and my dissertation would be on well, you could do this, 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 or this. And then my advisor, he wanted me to, no, you have to come with a recommendation. You should not tell people what they could do, you should tell them what they should do. Because if you don't do that, who can? Like, you're the only person who's talked to all these people. If you can't give recommendations, who can do that? So currently I'm kind of working on what should I say? And also a question he asked me was, what will you say that people should do? Like, what should they do? And the problem of summarizing all these people that I've talked to, they do different things. Like, they're very flexible. They adapt very much to the client. So some of the things that they tell me is, all my clients are different. Several of the people I interviewed, they said that. And if you see me coach, you will see me doing something different every time. So they're very, very client-directed. And so they're following principles from positive psychology, and from coaching, but they do it differently every time. So it's more like, it's more evidence-informed than evidence-based. So they know the research, and what they do is informed by that, but they kind of change it to fit the client and the context. As part of the review, I came up with a definition of positive psychology and positive psychology coaching. Especially, I'm focusing mostly on individuals. And so basically, it's very much like a normal coaching conversation, but where you draw on research, theories, models, assessments, and interventions from positive psychology when you do the coaching. But otherwise, it looks like normal coaching. At least most of the people that I work with, or most of the people that I interview. So most of them had either learned coaching first, and then they kind of spiced it up with positive psychology after participating in a MAP program or teaching at a university or whatever. Or if they learned positive psychology first, they still took some coaching training. So they do the combination, because if you only learn positive psychology, it's going to be a little difficult to deliver if you don't have some kind of framework to do it in. And you don't have to read everything on the slides. You can read it later. The review turned out that I found more than I thought I would, but most of it was not really high quality research on positive psychology and coaching. It was published in 31 different journals and lots of books and book chapters. And most of it is short studies, mostly qualitative research. The ones that were quantitative, short studies, no control group necessarily, and stuff like that. So it's not really high quality, but it's a beginning. That's, I don't know if you would expect more for a new field. That's the way you kind of start. This is what the qualitative part of my study looked like. This was the last person I interviewed. So I had my little video camera. I had an interview guide that I'd sent these people with all the questions that I mentioned before. And those questions were actually based on what other coaches wanted me to ask. So I'd sent out my interview guide in a LinkedIn group on positive psychology and coaching, and I asked the other coaches, is this the information that you want me to produce, or is there something else you want me to ask about? So I got some feedback and changed the interview guide. So the interviews are based on what other people have said that they would like to know. And then I pump him for information for 1.5 to 2 hours. And it's basically, so it's qualitative interviews based on this semi-structured interview guide, and I analyze it through thematic analysis. I'm using a theory, and you have a model from that theory or group of theories in front of you if you sit near some handouts. And so there's a book called The Heart and Soul of Changes in Ontology. So it's a group of theories focusing on how to interpret what seems to work in professional conversations, specifically in psychotherapy. But we don't have the same type of research in coaching. So I haven't seen, I think there are about 25 randomized controlled trials in coaching that I know of. And no, I have seen no meta-analysis, so it's very difficult to kind of summarize what seems to work. So therefore, I kind of borrow from the literature on psychotherapy, and especially when it comes to psychology and psychological approaches to coaching, they borrow heavily from psychotherapy. So even though coaching is different context, some of the clients who come and ask for coaching, about 30 to 50% of them can get a clinical diagnosis. So there's a huge overlap between the people, also the people who practice coaching. Some of them have a psychotherapy background also. So, and some of the models and techniques like cognitive coaching is based on cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused coaching is based on solution-focused reframing therapy, and so forth. And so there's a huge overlap between coaching and psychotherapy. And therefore, I think it's kind of fair that since we don't have research on coaching, then I borrow this kind of research. And I really like this model, and the way that you can interpret it is that we want to explain what creates outcome, in this case in psychotherapy, and I think you can use coaching also. And it turns out that 80%, up to 87% of the variance in the outcome is not explained by what happens in the session. It's actually explained by the client and what happens outside of the session, which is really important. Then what happens in the session, over here, you have the alliance, and the alliance, that includes the relationship, plus that you agree on goals and means. And that's really, really important for explaining the outcome. So if you have a really bad relationship, or you don't agree on the goals and means, then that will kind of hinder you in creating an effect. Here you have the effect of the coach, or the therapist in this case, so it really means a lot who delivers it. So there's research on psychotherapy, on a psychiatrist delivering medicine that works, and psychiatrists that deliver medicine that does not work. And the best ones get best results, even if they use medicine that, placebo. They get better results than the worst ones who use active medicine. So it really, really matters a lot who delivers it, if you're good at what you do. Over here, you also have expectations. So if the client expects that it's going to work, and if you have an allegiance to the method, you expect that this method will also help the client, that means something also. And then you have the techniques and models. They explain about 1% of the variance in outcome, based on this interpretation of the research in psychotherapy. And in psychotherapy, there's a huge debate on how to do the research, how to interpret it. So this is a little controversial. So not everybody would agree with this way of interpreting things. But the interesting thing is, most coaching training courses I've participated in, they focus on this one. They focus on coaching questions, coaching models. But if that only contributes 1% to the variance in outcome, why on earth would you focus most of your training there? Like, why would you not focus more on the client and the context and being client-directed and stuff like that? Most of the people I interviewed, they're actually very client-directed. They adapt quite a lot to the client. So basically, I'm making two assumptions. One is that this is a correct interpretation of the research in psychotherapy. Plus, I assume also that I can move this model and interpret my own data in coaching on this. And I use this metaphor because I work at the Department of Sports. So we have our own swimming pool, and we have a gym, and we also have a climbing wall outside of the building where I work. So I use the climbing wall as a metaphor. So this person can climb the wall because there are all these grips on, but if you take all of them down, it would be very, very difficult, if not impossible. But you don't really need all of these to get up there. You only need a few. And many of the effective factors in coaching, I assume, are like this. So you don't need to ask specific questions. You don't need to follow a specific model. You don't need to do all these things as long as you have something else that you can put instead. So for instance, a long time ago, back in 1996, there was a study conducted on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And the idea is that cognitive behavioral therapy, or the idea back then was, it works because we restructure people's thoughts. So it works through cognitive restructuring. And the way to find out whether that is true or not is to do a dismantling study. So you have a study where 2 or 3 groups or more, they get the same treatment, except in one of the groups you take out what you believe is the active ingredient. So they get cognitive behavioral therapy without cognitive restructuring. And then you kind of expect that it will work less well, since if you have taken out the active ingredient, it should work less well. Turn out it worked just as well. So you can take that, it's like a grip, you can take it down, but if you have all the other ones, it's still going to work. So basically, if I jump back to this one, so even though you take a little bit out here, you have all the rest, and you have all of this, the client working. So basically, my assumption is you should maybe focus on the big bubbles here and not focus too much on your coaching toolbox. All right. then I have a little reflection exercise, because you learn the best when you start, working on some of what you've heard. So I'd like to ask you to turn to the person sitting next to you and try to answer these questions. So can you relate to this understanding of effective factors? If so, how? And if this understanding of the effective factors is true for coaching, what could or should some of the implications for your work be? So if you're doing coaching, most of you raised a hand before, like if this is true, what could be or should be some of the implications for your work? Just 2-3 minutes. So based on this theory, I have organized some of the data that I've collected, and so what I'm going to show here is also on the handout that at least those of you who sit close to me have. So I made this tool for you, and it's the same as the information here. So if you don't have it, you can download it from the internet.
Are there any space lines? Are there any extras? Yeah.
Otherwise, you can download it from the internet. I have the address on here. So basically, what is on that paper is the same as here. So you're going to see it. All right. So what I'm going to present to you here is based on the heart and soul of change. It's based on a book called The Heroic Client, which focuses very much on client-directed, outcome-informed approaches to, or one approach to psychotherapy. Then the literature review that I conducted, plus these qualitative interviews that I did. And I have not tested these, I collect information, but I have not tested information. So I don't know if the people that I interviewed were like the best coaches in the world. I don't know if they get the best results. So this is not really best practice, but at least they were some of the most experienced people in the field. They were some of the best trained people in the field, because that's how I picked them. They had published on it, so they must have reflected on what they're doing. So it's probably okay, but I just, so you don't take it for more than that. So it's ideas for what you could do. It's not necessarily something that you're just 100% sure that will work. So the first category is the coachee and the context. So if it's true that the coachee and the context will account for, let's say, 80 to 87% of the variance in outcome, that would be a nice place to have your focus, have your attention. So what could you do? Well, some of the people that I talk to, they do lots of assessments before the first session, or in the first session, or in between the first and second session. Kind of depends on who I talk to. And one of the things that you could assess is the client's readiness to change. So there's actually a little bit of coaching research on readiness to change, and it matters for the outcome. So if the client is ready to change, there's a greater likelihood that the client would benefit from coaching. So I actually send people an email before I meet them first time, and I have a little survey where I ask about this stuff. So it's like Word document attached to the email. Also, if you get to know the coach, the coachee, like the coachee's goals, challenges, needs, preferences, beliefs, resources, and display an empathic understanding, that might also help. Especially, it's kind of funny that most coaching models don't have the word needs in. So if you want to be client-directed, it would be nice to know what the client needs, like how can you be of help to that person. But most coaching models don't really have the client in focus. It's more like the GROW model, goals, reality, options, will, but you're not really assessing the client's needs. And it's probably, I don't know if it's true, but I think it's probably a good idea.
Could you give some examples of what you mean by coach's needs?
Coach's needs. Yes, so for instance, if I assume I want to help you, and I have the assumption I've been trained as a coach, so I assume that you need to reflect, so therefore I ask you questions. So that's an assumption. But what if you don't need that? What if you need information, or you need motivation, or you need something else? So probably be a good idea for me to find out first what you need, and then I can take out of my toolbox what might help you. But if I make the assumption before we even start, you need to reflect, and therefore I will ask you questions.
Thank you.
It's probably not a good idea to do that, but a lot of people are trained that way. So questions are good tools, but not necessarily the only tools. And the people that I interviewed, they were very flexible. They would also share research. They would, give articles. They would hand out, this or that. So coaching questions is just one of the things you can do. And before you do anything, it's probably a good idea to find out what the client needs.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How many of the people that you interviewed were ICF trained coaches?
Only some of them.
Okay.
Only a handful.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the people that I interviewed, they also use self-determination theory, if you know that one. So it's a motivation theory, and according to that theory and a lot of research behind it, people have 3 needs. So autonomy, relatedness, and competency. And so the way that they work was to try to ensure that in the coaching that people got those 3 needs fulfilled. So if I take away your autonomy by telling you what to do instead of asking you what you'd like to do, so they try to get those needs fulfilled. Also, identify what it would take for the coachee to reach his or her goals. So that's kind of the question that you asked before about the needs. So I need to find out, is it information you need, motivation, skills, you need to practice more, whatever. What do you need? So if some of you saw the presentation before with Peterson, David Peterson, he had a developmental pipeline. So you can have a bottleneck somewhere along the line, and if they need something and you don't know it's that, you might be working in a different area. And then adapt your coaching. So a lot of the people that went through the MAP program who are not psychologists, one of the things that they had to do with their coachees was to kind of change the language. They didn't want to use the word intervention necessarily, or homework, exercise, or 3 blessings or something. Like, some of the language didn't really fit the client, so they had to translate it into something else. So as part of my dissertation, I'm thinking about making a phrase book, a psychobabble phrase book. So all the psychological concepts and what people have called it instead. Also, help the coachee take ownership. So that's kind of built into most kind of coaching, that you want the coachee to take ownership. And you can do that by supporting the autonomy. Also, some of the people that I interviewed, they demanded commitment, and they would follow up. They would hold people accountable. So demanding commitment is, if you want to work with me, you have to agree to show up like for 10 sessions or whatever. So it's one of them was a sports coach, or her background was in sports, but now she's doing kind of life coaching and stuff. But in sports, you can't just show up on a team and then not come the next time and then come back. You kind of have to commit. Either you're here and you're part of it, or you're not. And her approach to coaching was like that. You have to commit, because the best results, at least in psychotherapy, come from the people who work, the longest time. So if you just show up whenever you feel like it, it's not, you're probably not going to achieve your goals. So she demanded commitment, and several of them also held people accountable. So have you done your homework exercise? Okay, how did it go? And stuff like that. And especially in group coaching, if you commit to doing something, and next time I ask you in front of the group, did you do it? And some people, didn't feel comfortable with that, but it worked. So some of the coaches, they did stuff like that. Also, giving homework assignments, or home play as someone called it, or field works, like someone also called it because they didn't like this work, is something that some of these people do. They also, they send articles. Some people, they attend conferences, they write notes, and then they have binders, folders where they put these notes. And when a client comes that has a challenge that has to do with well-being or self-efficacy or whatever, they would pull out those notes and give it to the client. So they give information away. Also, some of the coaches, they would sometimes explain research, and they would have done that for several years, again and again. So they thought they could save time by video recording themselves, putting the videos out on YouTube, and then just referring to the client. You can watch this video where I explain about this concept, and then we can talk about it next time. So that's also a way that they try to save time in the coaching session, so they have time for something else.
Did that work?
I don't know if it works, because I'm not testing hypotheses. So I'm just collecting their ideas. So I really don't know, but I think at least they're saving time.
So when you're mentioning something here, like the video idea, would that be because the majority would say it, or even only one of the 40 would say it? Would you put it up?
Yeah, a couple would say it, not everybody.
So more than one.
Yeah, yeah. Or if it's a really good idea, then I would take it on, even though only one person is.
If you like, yeah.
Yeah, then the research on psychotherapy seems to suggest that half of the clients in psychotherapy drop out. Like there's a dropout rate on 47% on average drop out before they agree with the therapist that they should end. And so one of the best ways you can increase your outcomes is to get people to stay engaged, like to keep on working towards their goals. And I don't know I haven't seen any numbers for coaching, so I don't know how many people will drop out. But if you can help the coachees stay engaged in working towards their goals, you're probably going to get better outcomes. So the research on grit, the more gritty, the more time people put into practice, the better outcomes. The same on the research on deliberate practice. People who spend like 10,000 hours, like 4 hours, 5 days a week, for 10 years, usually end up in world class. So the more hours, the more effort you put into it, the better results. So if you can keep people staying engaged or referring them to someone else that they can work with, it's probably a good idea. Also, asking the coachee for feedback. And it's kind of funny that not that many people do that, and not that many people actually measure the results. So there's a Danish survey a couple of years ago, only 4% like do measurements of their coaching in Denmark, or at least back then. So they have a very unsystematic way of doing this, asking so what went well, or so did you what could I do differently in the future? But it's very unsystematic. And at least some of the research in psychotherapy seems to suggest that if you want to improve your outcomes, collecting feedback from the client on how the client felt that the session went, plus feedback on the outcomes, that's really good ways to improve the outcomes. And some of the people that I interviewed do that, but not many.
If I can make one addition, I am a psychotherapist and a coach, and there was some beautiful research on excellent therapists, psychotherapists, by Duncan and Miller, and there was a really surprising outcome, because the outcome was the best psychotherapists were the therapists who asked the most feedback, and it wasn't that they were not sure of themselves what to do, but they were convinced that it was necessary every section to ask, are we on a good track? Is this the path you want to go? Should we change something? And it's very client-directed and good feedback.
Yeah. So I don't know if you could hear it in the back, but some of the best psychotherapists are the ones who ask for the most feedback. So to become client-directed, if you want to adapt things to the client, asking the client about feedback is a really good idea. It's a very simple idea, and it doesn't have to take that much time, but it's a really good idea, because people often don't have, and they don't know how good they are. So most people think they're above average drivers. Most psychotherapists think they're above average, and probably the same for coaches. So it's a really good idea to ask the client for feedback.
Any feel if it was more effective if you asked the client verbally at the end of a session versus sending them maybe an email survey at the end?
I don't know, but I ask them at the end of the session every time.
And I ask at the beginning of the next one.
Yeah.
As well,
Okay.
How do you go? What do you learn?
Okay, yeah. So in the beginning of the session, you can ask about the outcomes. So have you progressed? And there are like measures to do that. There's an outcome rating scale, ORS, and at the end of the session, I use a session rating scale called SRS. But there are several scales that you can use. But just asking for feedback is probably a really good idea. Some people do. Then there's the coach. So that's you. So it means a lot what you do, how you deliver the coaching. So these people that I interview, they all do different things, and from time to time they do different things, but they do follow kind of rules of thumb. Like they try to be helpful, they improvise, they try to be flexible. So they have rules of thumb. It's like algorithms. So if you put in some input, so you have these algorithms, and some results come out. But if you put in a different client or a different challenge, something else happens. So the coaching looks different, but it still follows the same rules of thumb. And one of the most important principles or rules of thumb is try to help. Instead of some people try to earn money or try to build a reputation or try to do something else. So just try to help. And then pay full attention. And some of the beginners, some people who start coaching, they kind of focus on what should be the next question I should ask. And they're not really paying full attention. It wasn't a problem with the people that I interviewed were really experienced, so it didn't kind of show up for them. Then people use their expertise. In coaching, a lot of people learn to ask questions, not tell. But most of the people that I interviewed, they actually use their expertise. They tell. If they know something about research, they share that research. If they have models, they print them out and put them on the table. So they use their expertise in the coaching session. And it seems to work. And I haven't seen any research on coaching that suggests otherwise. So I think I've seen 2 or 3 trials where one method is pitted against another method. And so we really don't know if you should only ask questions or you can do other things. And if you look at psychotherapy research, there's documentation that lots of other techniques also work. So I can't see why it should be different in coaching.
I'm just curious if then you're, because I know in a lot of coach trainings, they'll tell you then to tell the person, okay, now I'm putting on a consultant hat. I'm no longer a coach because I'm not supposed to give you. So do you feel like that's, in that case, you would say, now I'm putting on my positive psychology expert hat or whatever it is, if you're giving them models and information as opposed to asking questions?
Yeah, you can do that. So I actually do it before we even start. I have this little questionnaire I send them, plus I have a little text where I kind of define how it works. So this is what you can expect. So once in a while, I will ask questions. Once in a while, I might tell you something, or I might ask permission. I know something about this area that we're talking about. Do you want to know? Do you want to know something of the research? And people always say yes. They like to get the information.
Yeah.
And if you only ask questions, it's my experience that at the end of the session, they ask you, what do you think? So often they like to have that kind of normal kind of conversation around a topic. And I haven't seen research that says that that's bad, even though a lot of people learn in coaching training courses, you should only ask questions. But I think if you're coaching a person who works in an area that you have no expertise in, then only asking questions is probably a really good idea. Don't start recommending anything. So you can kind of, but if you're working, if let's say that someone comes to me and wants to work on well-being, and I know a lot about well-being, like holding back my knowledge, that would be kind of strange. So I share that knowledge if they want to hear it. And the coaches that I interviewed do the same. Then also I ask these people, so what would you suggest? Like, what would you suggest to other people who want to start using positive psychology when they coach? And some of what they say is, read the articles, attend the conferences, join a study group, try to develop. So take a coaching training course and then get to know the research. So become knowledgeable about this. And also, attend training courses. But I have attended a lot of training courses because the way that I made a living was to attend conferences, go back home, teach research, plus hire people to come from abroad to teach in Denmark. So I have attended tons of training courses because I arranged them. And it's, I must say, I'm overloaded with information, and it's not really the amount of information that you have, it's more like how much do you actually implement. And so it doesn't really matter if you have 10 screwdrivers or 100. You don't need 100. You need to know how to use the ones that you have. How you get credit in the coaching industry is by attending training courses or getting supervision and stuff like that. But I would say, if I was certifying you, I would kind of certify you based on the results, or if I had to certify you based on the input, I would be certifying you based on how much you implement, like how much of this do you actually use. And then they recommend take your own medicine. If you give positive interventions to your clients, you should try them out on yourself first, because that kind of gives you background information. You kind of get a feeling for what they have to go through, and also do what works for you. So if you have certain strengths, you should of course use them in coaching. And since you have different strengths from what I have, the way that you should be doing coaching is not the same as how I do coaching. So if you saw me coach, you should not copy that, because it wouldn't fit you. So we try to adapt it to the clients, but we also try to adapt it to the coach. Then there's the alliance. So that's the relationship, the agreement on goals and means. So one of the persons that I interviewed, he's actually here today. He said, "I'm just a friendly guy." You know, so being friendly with the clients, trying to establish trust, so that they will be able to kind of share with you. It's very basic human behavior, but some people kind of get caught up in their models and become too technical and prepare questions. But most of the ones that I interviewed, they were very good at this, really good at creating a trusting relationship and talking about these things. Yeah. Illicit collaboration. And agreement on goals and means for the coaching, so you set goals together, but that's very normal in coaching. And agreement on the means. So the means doesn't have to be coaching questions, it could be something else. So if they want you to comment on it, so I get a lot of clients, because I'm a psychologist, who have had maybe conflicts at work, and they want my opinion on it. Do you think that I'm far out? You know, do you think my way of seeing things is totally wrong? So if that's what they need, well, then that's what I'd like to give them. And if it works, it works. I don't care what you do. If it works, it works. And most of the people I interviewed, it's the same way. They do whatever they think might help the clients. Then some people, they use case conceptualization, especially the ones who've been trained in psychotherapy. So together with the client, they try to kind of come up with an explanation for this is, you know, how the situation is, this is where you want to get, blah, blah, blah. So they have a shared understanding of the situation. Then you can also act as role models. Some of the people that I was interviewing, they were talking about that, because obesity is contagious, happiness is contagious, stress is contagious, so and all these kinds of behavior is contagious. So if you emanate positivity, that will be contagious. So if you can act as a role model, that will actually influence your client, not just through, you know, the coaching questions or models, but just by the way that you are. So some of the coaches focus on that one. And yeah, ask the coachee for feedback. Then there's models and techniques, and a lot of times when I present, people want tools, and that's why I wrote it down, so now it looks like a tool even though it's the same. So people want something that they can use in the session, but I would say it's the wrong place to have your focus. So it's like if you sail a boat, you kind of look at the target where you want to go. You don't look at the rudder. So you don't focus on the tool, how to get there. You just have to have it, and you have to know how to use it, but you're focusing on something else. And I think coaching probably should be the same way. So when I studied the MAP program, there's a very big focus on positive interventions, and that's like focusing on techniques and models. But it's just as relevant to focus on, so who's delivering the positive intervention, who is receiving it, what is the context, do you have a good relationship and stuff like that. So all the things around the intervention is probably more important than the intervention in itself. So it's nice to know all these interventions, but it's probably not the most important things. Then people, they were kind of integrating positive psychology into their pre-existing way of working. So if you already have been working for a couple of years in coaching or consulting or something like that, then what people do is they spice it up with positive psychology. They don't really revolutionize necessarily the way that they work. They kind of integrate it or weave it into the way that they already work. And then, as I mentioned before, they were following guiding principles. So using their intuition. So often I would ask people, so why did you pick that intervention? And how do you know to use this assessment and not that one? And people say, it's just my intuition. They had difficulties explaining why they did it. And when I interview people working at universities doing research on coaching or positive psychology, they would often have a theoretical rationale for what they did. And then they kind of told me, and they thought that coaches should have that also. And I don't know if that's true. I don't think some of the ones that I interviewed are probably really good and get good outcomes, and they're not able to make it explicit before I kind of force them to do it. So I think you can practice really well without being able to verbalize what you do. But I think if you want to develop or if you want to teach somebody else, it's probably a good idea to be able to verbalize it. But just to practice and get good outcomes, I don't think you need it. but I'm not sure. Yeah, then people draw on the research that they know, and some of them kind of get overwhelmed with the amount of research in positive psychology, but they draw on what they know. So if they have attended a conference like this and written notes, that's the notes that they give, or if they read a certain book, that's the book that they're basing on. So they don't really have to know it all, just as long as they're able to kind of use what they already know. And then also, if they can explain the rationale for why they do what they do. So often they would take time out in the coaching session, or some of them, and not all of them. And so if I ask you a coaching question, before I ask you the question, I can actually explain why I asked you this question. So I know this model, and according to this one, there's this category with, let's say, something that you're good at, but that drains you. And we call it learned behavior. And so I explain something, and then that's why I ask you this question. So people kind of know the rationale behind the questions. Some people do that. Yeah.
I think the focus on technique for schools is that we're so taught that we have to measure what we teach, and tools are easier to measure than attitude.
Okay, yeah.
And you're expressing that it's your attitude toward the client that's really important, and that you can't measure that easily.
No, it's probably more difficult.
So I think we have like a measurement myopia in instruction. I know in the university where I taught, we focused on measuring the outcomes, and there's some outcomes that are so valuable that you can't measure. And that's what you're telling us, that this attitude toward the client or coachee is probably uppermost, and I agree with you.
Yeah, but also I think some of the reason why there is this focus on techniques is because in medicine you focus on the active ingredient that you put into, like a pill, and that way of thinking has been adopted by research in psychotherapy. So you assume that the effect is in the technique. You don't assume that it's in the doctor or in the hospital, or you assume it's in the medicine. And so in psychotherapy they assume that it's in the technique, and that way of doing research has been adopted by coaching and positive psychology. So you still focus on techniques, models, positive interventions, even though the research seems to suggest that maybe a lot of what creates the outcome is actually in the people involved.
The relationship.
And the relationship. So, yeah. Then also follow some kind of procedure. So there's research on structure seems to be helpful. So if you follow some kind of coaching structure, that seems to be correlated with better outcomes, for instance, economic outcomes for the clients. But I don't think it matters what structure. So it's like going into the supermarket. If it's the supermarket where you usually go and you know where to find the milk and you know where to find the bread, it would be kind of annoying if every week when you come there they change the place. So you don't really care whether the milk is over here or there, just as long as you know where it is, where to find it. And I think it's the same for coaching. Just as long as there's some kind of structure or predictability, then it's fine. But if it's completely random, then it's probably more difficult for the client to kind of, it will be more chaotic. Then people use these positive assessments for positive psychology, and they build their own toolbox. So they use the tools that they learn, but they also create their own tools along the way, their own models or physical tools like strengths cards. Here I have some from Australia. So people kind of build their own toolbox after a while. And then there's the last one, the expectations and hope and placebo. So this one is probably pretty important. So in football, the coach does not score the goals. So the coach's effect on the outcome is through the players. So the coach has an indirect effect. So probably it's in coaching. So it's the client who creates the outcome, and you work through the client. But the client is only willing to put in effort if he or she believes that something will come out of it. So people who are more optimistic and sit down in the doctor's waiting room, they're more likely to look at the brochures, whereas people who are more pessimistic are less likely to do it because they don't think that putting in effort will give them anything. And also, there's research on positive success expectancies. If you think that it's going to work, it's more likely to work. So the expectations are pretty important. So your work might work through these expectations. So the techniques might actually go this way, like, so this might be a mediator for your work. Does that make sense? At least some of the researchers on psychotherapy kind of speculate that it might work this way. We actually don't know very much about the mechanisms of psychotherapy, even though we've done research for so many years on that. And in coaching, we have almost no research on the mechanisms, so it's pure speculation. Then you can heighten hope. Turns out that people who are more hopeful get more out of psychotherapy. So if people score low on hope when they start, that would be a really good place to kind of work with them. And several of the people that I interviewed, they have hope kind of integrated into their way of coaching. So they would ask about goals, they would ask about motivation, they would ask about pathways. So that's kind of normal in coaching, that's kind of built in. Then you can share successful experiences. So some clients would ask these coaches, what have other people been doing? Like, how have other people solved this? And then they would share. And then do what you believe is right. So pick a method that you think this will work, and then you use that method. And it doesn't have to be the same as the method that other people do. And also some people give compliments or try to recognize the person. So I see that you put in a lot of effort in between the sessions here, or you're very courageous sharing this with me or something like that. So they give compliments like that. So this is kind of summary. So there's me, there's you, there's the relationship and the agreement on goals and means. There is allegiance and expectations, and then there's also, of course, the techniques and models. And in coaching and positive psychology, there's this tradition of creating models or acronyms like GROW model or PERMA, something like that. So I thought, I want to be famous too. I want to create an acronym. So I made an acronym for you. Marty! So he's sometimes treated like a rock star, so I like to make fun of him. Don't tell him. And actually, don't tell anybody. I don't want to be known as the person who invented Marty coaching. All right. So this is when I wanted to send in an abstract. This was what I read on the website for the conference. And so workshops are 60 minutes, small group interactive sessions that focus on either a specific positive psychology intervention or assessment. So there is this focus on technique model, and it's probably not where you should focus. So it's kind of everywhere. So I have some examples I've already mentioned some of these, but what some of the people do. So they create coaching questions. So instead of asking how have you been since the last session, they might ask, so what has gone well since the last session? So they kind of create coaching questions based on positive psychology, and they follow these theoretical principles like focusing on the positive or building strengths, stuff like that. They use assessments, but they use them differently, and some people follow up systematically, some people don't, but many of them use assessments, especially the VIA. That was like the most mentioned assessment. Then they introduce concepts, so this is like social contagion. So they mention concepts from positive psychology, introduce that into the conversation, and sometimes clients will say, oh, I didn't know about that word, oh, now suddenly everything makes sense. So sometimes you can give client a language by giving them these concepts. Then they explain theoretical principles. This is like building on strengths instead of weaknesses. So they take some of these principles from positive psychology, and then they try to explain it to the clients. And also some of the research results, like 3-to-1 ratio or stuff like that. Then they show models. Some of them print models out and put them on the table and kind of have a discussion around them. They develop their own tools. So this is like coaching tools, a coaching tool for what you could talk about in coaching. This is an example of tools. So some people like to have something in their hands, something concrete. So that's also very normal. I developed some coaching strengths cards back in 2006. I thought I was very creative, but then I found out lots of other people have done the same. So it's very common for a lot of coaches to have like tools like this, so that they can hand out, or some people give books away that they've written or whatever. Some people are very creative in the tools that they create. This is something called Wordle. I don't score very high on creativity, so I'm very impressed when I hear other people, what they have done, with what they have learned in positive psychology. Yeah.
What do they do with Wordle?
So one person, he does the best reflective self exercise, and you get feedback from other people what they think is your strengths, and then he puts it into Wordle. And then if you ask 20 people to give you feedback, 10 of them do that. You put the text that they sent back to you into Wordle, and you get this out.
And this is yours?
You know Wordle?
Yeah. Yeah, then they share experiences from others. They act as a role model. So this is a role model for me. He died last year. He was 86, and he was the world's oldest kite surfer. So he was kite surfing from the same beach that I was kite surfing from. And he actually died after kite surfing for the last time. And so acting as a role model is contagious. And they talk about that. And then they try out tools in the session, so instead of just talking, they try to build skills. So instead of sending people home doing 3 good things exercise, they do it in the session, some of them. So they have tried it out. They give printout of articles, they refer to websites, they recommend books, and they do all kinds of things. So asking coaching questions is just one of the things that they do. So they have a huge repertoire of ways that they try to use this positive psychology. So you don't have to kind of feel that you have to do it in a certain way. You find your own way, and you watch my videos when I put them out. So I have a little coaching exercise here. I don't know if we have time to do it, so I might. Yeah.
Did you get a sense from these coaches? Are they meeting mostly face to face, by phone? How are they actually coaching these?
Yeah, most of them meet face to face, but not all of them. So some actually only do telephone coaching. So it's very good.
And Skype?
Yes, some also use Skype. Not that many, but yeah. So, and some clients prefer Skype because then they can see you. So I haven't seen research on whether it has the same outcomes as face-to-face coaching, but I think it does. There's some research on psychotherapy. It seems to work really well. Yeah.
Yeah, just the criteria of the coaches you were interviewing.
Yeah.
Can you just mention those?
Yeah. So I made a literature review of what's been published in on coaching in positive psychology and coaching. So I picked based on who has published in this field, who has a MAP degree, or who's teaching at universities in these programs, or who has a master's degree in coaching and used positive psychology in the coaching. And then I did a bit of snowballing, so I asked those people if they knew other people that I should interview. So it's usually people who have several years of experience and some kind of degree in this area and have published. But not all of them meet all the criteria. All right, so I'm going to skip this exercise and just have a few more comments here. So we need more research, of course, and especially it'd be nice to have more research on who benefits from what and what they can do to progress. So like research on the coachees, not on the coach's toolbox, and also on the context. So which kind of context can we build or recommend or whatever, or how can we change the context so we'll support the client? And also, someone mentioned the research on super shrinks. So who are like the best coaches? Who gets the best outcomes? And can we do research on them? What is it that they do that we can learn? And how can coaches train? So not necessarily with training programs, but you might be able to train on your own or together with somebody else, or you could bring your clients to workshops or whatever. There are so many ways that you can learn. So one of the best ways that I've learned is actually by interviewing other people. So I've attended so many training courses, but I've actually learned more from just interviewing other people about how they work. And in the coaching industry, you don't get credit for that, but it's actually a really good way of learning. And then also research on how to use the research. We need more of that, or so I think, because it's my area. I have some materials on the internet that you can find and download if you want to learn more. Some networks, and websites and the videos that I'm going to put out. So you can download all of this. But I just want to end up with a few questions if someone has something more to ask. Yeah.
I was curious. You mentioned that people should ask for a commitment, but I'm curious if there was any commonality, like 6-session commitment, 3-session commitment, done until you reach your goal or whatever.
Yeah, no, people do it differently.
Yeah.
And often, some people don't count sessions, but like 3 months or 6 months or something like that. So there is no commonality. You kind of find out. But I think it'd be very simple. Some people sell like 10, so if you sell 10 sessions. So in Denmark, if you want to take the bus, you can have this little card that you kind of you put in, and it's going to cut off a little piece of it. So they sell cards like that. So you buy 10 sessions, and I know from my own experience, I had problems with my back, and I had to pay for 10 sessions, so I showed up for all of it, because now I paid. So I think that if you do something as simple as just changing the price structure, that might create more client engagement than any technique you could learn in any coaching training course. So I think focusing on the client and the context and what you can do to kind of increase client engagement is probably more important than any of the positive interventions or techniques that you could learn. But the combination of all is, of course. Last question? Okay. Well, then I say thank you for listening.